Okay, so let's dive in. You know that feeling when something that's supposed to make life easier suddenly turns into a massive headache?
Yeah, absolutely. Like that perfect tool that just backfires.
Exactly. That's kind of what's happening right now with remote access tools.
Yeah.
In the cybersecurity world anyway, we rely on them constantly, right? Managing systems, keeping networks running smooth, fixing things from practically anywhere.
Oh, completely. They're foundational for modern IT, whether you're talking huge corporate networks or, managed service providers handling client systems. Indispensable.
But, and here's the kicker, what happens when those super powerful, super useful tools become the exact way attackers get in?
And that's the collision, right? Convenience meeting vulnerability, head on. These tools, they have deep, often privileged access into networks, and threat actors, they've absolutely realized this offers a direct route, often undetected too, straight to the sensitive stuff, the critical systems.
So they don't even need to build some complex backdoor anymore.
A lot of the time, no. Why bother? The door's already there. And frankly, in many cases, it's wide open if it's not properly secured.
Which is exactly what we're digging into today, this whole world of remote access software. We're going to focus particularly on RMM tools, remote monitoring and management.
The real workhorses.
Right, for IT departments, but especially for those managed service providers, the MSPs, who keep everything running for their clients. So the plan is explore their role, figure out why they're such tempting targets, and dissect the actual tactics attackers are using.
Yeah, looking at the TTPs, tactics, techniques, and procedures.
We've pulled together recent info from cybersecurity agencies, industry experts, trying to really get a handle on the threat landscape. We'll even look at a very specific, very now example of a vulnerability being hammered in the wild.
And crucially, how to build better defenses. What can actually be done?
Okay, now, protecting your digital assets, your data, it's obviously paramount, especially with these kinds of threats. And that brings us perfectly to our sponsor for this deep dive, Stonefly. Stonefly is a real leader in the space enterprise storage, backup, and disaster recovery. AI storage, cloud solutions, the whole gamut. And importantly, they focus heavily on secure, ransomware-proof storage, things like air-gapped and immutable storage.
Which are absolutely critical defenses. That difference between a minor blip and a catastrophe.
Exactly. So if robust data protection is something you're thinking about, and you probably should be, you can reach out to Stonefly. It's sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo. We'll mention them again later. Right. Let's get grounded first. When we talk about remote access software, RAS, and then RMM, what are we actually talking about? What do these things do?
Okay, so think of RAS, remote access software, as the big umbrella term. It's basically any tech that lets you connect to and control a computer, a server, even a network device from somewhere else entirely.
Like the simple remote desktop tools some people use.
Yeah, that's a basic form.
Yeah.
RMM, remote monitoring and management, is, well, it's more sophisticated. It's built for IT pros managing lots of systems efficiently. Usually you've got an RMM agent, a little bit of software installed on every device or server you need to manage.
And it does more than just let you see the screen.
Oh, much more. It's not just remote control. That agent is constantly collecting data system, health, performance, configuration details. It's monitoring.
Got it. So it's like the IT admin's eyes and hands, but working remotely.
That's a great way to put it. Yeah. And it's fundamental for maintaining IT infrastructure. But increasingly, we're seeing it used for OT, operational technology systems, and even ICS, industrial control systems.
Things like factory equipment, utility controls.
Exactly those. The core purpose is that comprehensive remote oversight. RMM lets admins gather really detailed data, automate routine stuff like patching software across, hundreds or thousands of machines at once, setting up new PCs remotely, doing remote backups, recovery operations, troubleshooting problems without needing someone physically there.
Huge efficiency gain.
Massive.
Yeah.
And who uses them most? MSPs, definitely. Managed service providers handling IT for multiple clients rely on this heavily. SaaS providers use them too, maybe for back-end management or supporting customers. And of course, internal IT help desks, network admins in companies of all sizes.
It allows a small team to manage a huge footprint.
Precisely.
Yeah.
And think about business continuity, disaster recovery. RMM is critical there too. You can still manage systems even if the physical site is, say, flooded or otherwise inaccessible. It's just a really powerful, proactive way to manage complex digital environments at scale.
Okay, the value proposition is clear. Necessary tools. But you mentioned that dark side. How do the very features that make them so powerful for the good guys, the admins, also make them so attractive for the bad guys?
Yeah, and that's the crux of the issue. Those core capabilities designed for legitimate management, accessing systems, running commands, transferring files, installing software, those are precisely the actions an attacker wants to take once they get unauthorized access.
So they're hijacking the intended purpose.
Exactly. And what we're seeing more and more is threat actors are, well, they're sort of skipping the step of developing their own custom malware, their own backdoors, their remote access Trojans or RATs. Instead, they're actively compromising legitimate RMM software itself, or maybe the accounts used to access it. And then they just use the tools that are already there, already integrated, often trusted within the victim's network.
Okay, why? Why use the legitimate RMM instead of their own custom, potentially sneakier malicious code? What's the advantage for them?
Several big ones. First, and this is probably the most critical point, stealth. Because RMM software is legitimate, it's needed for business operations, it's often explicitly listed or trusted by security tools.
Like antivirus or EDR.
Exactly.
Yeah.
AV, EDR systems. They often see RMM activity and just think, okay, that's normal admin stuff. It doesn't immediately look suspicious. Plus, many RMM agents are digitally signed with valid certificates from the developer.
Which makes them look even more trustworthy to security software.
Right. It adds a layer of legitimacy. And in some places, the actual installation paths or the processes for the RMM might even be intentionally excluded from depth security inspection.
Why would they do that?
Usually to prevent false positives or performance issues, they don't want the security tools interfering with essential management tasks. But it creates a blind spot attackers can exploit.
So the RMM software just blends right in from the start, hiding in plain sight.
Perfectly put. Hiding in plain sight, that's the goal. Second big advantage, it's a massive shortcut for the attacker. Development-wise, they don't need to invest time and resources building, testing, and refining their own RATs, which, might get detected based on unique code signatures or behaviors.
They just grab a tool that already works.
Exactly. A widely available, well-understood, legitimate piece of software. And the functions are already there. Patching, file transfer, remote command execution, monitoring. These admin features in RMM are functionally very similar to what an attacker wants in their own malware.
So they're using the tool exactly as designed, just without permission.
Precisely. And sometimes they can even get around standard software deployment rules. Some RMM tools can be run as portable executables.
Meaning?
Self-contained files. They don't need a formal installation process. Sometimes they don't even need admin rights to run, depending on what they need to do. So an attacker might compromise just a regular user account, drop one of these portable RMM executables, and run it. Even with limited user rights, they might be able to use that RMM connection to probe the network, maybe attack other systems, or find ways to escalate their privileges later.
What about network defenses? Firewalls, things like that. Do they stop this?
Not always. Many remote management agents use end-to-end encryption for their communication back to the management server, which is good, right? You need that for legitimate secure management.
Right.
But that encryption also means the traffic just looks like, well, encrypted RMM traffic, even if the commands being sent inside that tunnel are malicious. A standard firewall might not be able to decrypt and inspect the content. So it might just let the malicious commands or data exfiltration pass through, thinking it's legitimate RMM activity.
Allowing the attacker to command and control systems undetected.
Potentially, yes.
And the scale factor. You mentioned MSPs using these tools to manage many clients. That sounds particularly worrying.
It is arguably the most concerning aspect. RMM is designed for efficiency, managing multiple connections, multiple clients from one place. That's the MSP's business model. But flip that around. For an attacker, compromising one MSP's RMM setup that could give them a direct pipeline into potentially dozens, maybe hundreds of downstream client networks.
It's a supply chain attack, essentially.
Textbook supply chain compromise. A single point of failure at the MSP exposes all their customers. And think about how many small and mid-sized businesses completely rely on MSPs for their IT, for their security. It creates this enormous potential attack surface through that trusted relationship.
This really sounds like that concept of living off the land attacks, or LOTL.
It's a perfect fit for the LOTL philosophy, yeah. Attackers aren't necessarily dropping obvious malware files that scream virus. They're using legitimate binaries, often signed, often trusted, things that are expected to be there or are installed through seemingly legitimate channels.
So they fly under the radar longer.
Exactly. It helps them maintain persistence, sustain their malicious activity without setting off immediate alarms. And the built-in RMM features monitoring systems, interacting directly, maybe gaining higher permissions, make it an ideal tool not just for staying in, but for moving laterally, finding more valuable targets within the network.
Okay, so let's say they're in. They've probably used legitimate credentials or maybe exploited something else initially.
Yeah.
And now they're using RMM. What does that attack playbook typically look like? How do they use RMM across the different stages of an intrusion?
Well, RMM is incredibly versatile for them. While sometimes, rarely, the RMM itself might be the initial way in if there's a vulnerability.
Like the SimpleHelp one we'll get to.
Exactly. But more commonly, it's used after the initial breach. So once they're inside, they might deploy RMM agents to other machines. Why? Persistence.
To keep their access, even if the first entry point gets closed.
That's precisely. It gives them fallback options. They also use it to deploy other malicious tools, maybe ransomware launchers, credential stealers, things like that. And, as we mentioned, lateral movement, using the RMM access on one machine to jump to others, looking for domain controllers, file servers, databases, the high-value assets. It can even assist in data exfiltration, using the RMM's file transfer capabilities to pull data out.
Ransomware keeps coming up. Is RMM a common tool in ransomware attacks specifically?
Very common. Extremely common, actually. RMM allows ransomware actors to manage the deployment efficiently. Think about encrypting hundreds of systems. Doing that manually is slow. Using an RMM, they can push the encryption software out and trigger it across many machines almost simultaneously from one central console.
Oof. Maximize the damage quickly.
Right. And we also see it used frequently in advanced persistent threat campaigns, APTs. There, the goal might be long-term espionage or positioning for future sabotage. RMM provides a stealthy, reliable way for them to maintain command and control over compromised systems over long periods.
Before they get the RMM deployed, how do they usually get that first foothold or the necessary credentials?
The usual suspects, really. Exploiting vulnerabilities in other internet-facing things, maybe a VPN appliance, a web server, some other software that hasn't been patched. Compromising legitimate servers, perhaps web servers, and using those as a beachhead to then pivot internally, and very, very frequently, compromise credentials.
Phishing, brute force.
All of the above. Phishing attacks tricking users into giving up logins, brute forcing weak passwords on exposed services, or just buying stolen credentials off the dark web. It's a huge market. Once they have that initial access or a set of valid user credentials, then they can often use built-in system tools to push the RMM agent onto other systems.
And how do they deploy it? Is it obvious, like a pop-up saying, install this agent?
Oh, definitely not. Stealth is key. They prefer silent deployment. They often use command line tools and scripting capabilities already present on Windows systems. Think PowerShell or WMI, Windows Management Instrumentation. They can write scripts that silently download the RMM agent, install it, or even just run a portable version in the background, all without any visible prompts or user interaction.
And they can do this across many machines.
Yes, scripts allow for automation. They can push it out wide relatively quickly. And sometimes, for redundancy, attackers might deploy multiple different RMM tools, or they might pair a legitimate RMM with their own custom malware, or even a commercial penetration testing tool like Cobalt Strike.
Why double up?
It gives them multiple ways back in. If one RMM connection is detected and blocked or the agent removed, they might still have access through the other tool. Makes them much harder to fully eradicate from the network.
This whole process, it sounds like it maps really closely to standard attack frameworks like MITRE, ATT, and CK.
It aligns perfectly. RMM isn't just one technique. It's a tool that enables a whole range of techniques across the ATT and CK matrix.
Okay, let's walk through that. How does acquiring RMM fit into, say, resource development?
Right. Under resource development, you've got techniques about getting the capabilities needed for an attack. IRMA-RE's T1588.002 obtain capabilities tool fits perfectly here. The attacker is acquiring the RMM software itself. Maybe they download a free trial version. Maybe they buy a license legitimately or illegitimately. Maybe they steal credentials for a licensed copy by compromising a vendor or an MSP. They're getting a legitimate tool, planning to repurpose it.
Okay. And then getting into the network initial access, how does RMM play there?
RMM and remote access software can be the initial vector in a few ways covered by ATT and CK. T133, external remote services, is relevant if they exploit a poorly secured remote access service like a VPN, or maybe even the RMM server itself if it's vulnerable, to get that first foothold.
Like the SimpleHelp case.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then there's T1195, supply chain compromise. Hugely important with RMM, especially via MSPs. The attacker compromises the provider's RMM or manipulates the software update process to gain access to all the downstream clients. We've also seen T1566, phishing, used.
Yeah.
Campaigns specifically designed to trick users into downloading and installing a legitimate RMM agent, maybe disguised as a document viewer or a software update.
Wow. Tricking the user into installing the tool themselves.
Yep. Then T-Tunnel 78, valid accounts, is incredibly common, using stolen or guest credentials to log directly into the RMM platform or other remote services. And the whole concept relies on T-Tunnel 199, trusted relationship. Attackers leverage the implicit trust between a business and its third-party provider, like an MSP, to bridge into the customer's network.
Okay, they're in. How about executing commands, running things executions?
That often involves T1059, command and scripting interpreter, particularly T1009.001 PowerShell. As we said, attackers frequently use PowerShell scripts, either to deploy the RMM agent silently in the first place, or once the agent is running, to execute commands through the RMM's remote shell capability.
And staying hidden. Defense evasion.
Key1R36, masquerading, is a common tactic. They might rename the RMM executable file. For instance, maybe they rename a Net Support Manager agent, a popular RMM, to something innocuous like ctfmon.exe, which is a legitimate Windows process name.
Hoping security tools or an admin glancing at processes won't notice it.
Right, or at least pause before investigating it. It's about blending in.
How do they find their way around the network once they have that RMM foothold?
That falls under discovery. T10018 remote system discovery can often be facilitated by the RMM tool itself. The RMM agent is designed to report back information about the system it's on, and sometimes includes features to scan the local network segment to find other devices. An attacker can just use those built-in features to map the internal network, identify other servers, workstations, potential targets for lateral movement.
And then actually moving between systems, lateral movement.
Several techniques apply here. T1021 remote services is the most direct, using the access provided by the RMM or credentials stolen via RMM to log into other systems using standard protocols like RDP or SMB Windows admin shares. You might also see T563 remote service session hijacking if they can take over an existing legitimate remote session, or T1210 exploitation of remote services if they find and exploit a vulnerability on another internal system after gaining initial access via RMM.
And finally, maintaining that connection back to themselves. Command and control.
That's where T1219, remote access software, comes in as a C2 technique itself. The attacker simply uses the established RMM connection, the legitimate, often encrypted tunnel created by the software as their command and control channel. They send commands down, get results back, transfer files, all leveraging the infrastructure of the legitimate RMM tool.
It is striking. One tool, designed for management, provides capabilities that tick boxes across almost every major phase of an attack.
It really does. And that's why detection is so challenging. You're not looking for obviously bad files. You're looking for legitimate software being used in malicious ways. Subtle behavioral anomalies.
Which brings us very neatly to this specific real-world example we mentioned, the recent warnings about a vulnerability being actively exploited.
Yes, that's the one in SimpleHelp RMM, tracked as CVE 2024-57727. Got a CDSS v3 score of 7.5, which is high severity. Definitely indicates significant potential impact.
And it affects specific versions of SimpleHelp.
That's right. It impacts SimpleHelp versions 5.5.7 and earlier. The good news, though, is that SimpleHelp did release patches, versions 5.5.8, and later addressed this vulnerability.
Okay, the vulnerability is described as path traversal. Can you break that down? What does that mean in practical terms?
Sure. Imagine a web application, like the SimpleHelp server's web interface. It's supposed to only serve files from a specific folder, right? Like its designated web directory. A path traversal flaw, sometimes called directory traversal, means an attacker finds a way to trick the application. They manipulate the file path in their request. By using sequences like DAW, which basically tells the file system go up one directory level, they can potentially escape that designated web folder.
And access files elsewhere on the server.
Exactly. They can potentially navigate up the directory structure and read files from almost anywhere on the server's operating system, depending on the permissions the web server process is running with. Break out of the intended sandbox.
So how did attackers exploit this specific CVE in SimpleHelp?
They crafted specific HTTP GET requests to the vulnerable SimpleHelp web interface. In the part of the request asking for a file, They included those sequences repeatedly, like to navigate upwards from the SimpleHelp web root directory. This allowed them to specify a path to an arbitrary file anywhere else on the server's file system, and the vulnerable SimpleHelp server would just retrieve it and send it back to the attacker.
Ouch. And why is being able to read arbitrary files particularly bad with SimpleHelp?
It's especially critical because of SimpleHelp's architecture. It stores almost all its important data configuration settings, sensitive credentials, secrets as local files right there on the server. So if an attacker can read any file, they can go straight for the most valuable configuration files.
Were those sensitive files encrypted or protected somehow?
Well, some parts were encrypted, but here's the critical flaw. Community researchers analyzing the vulnerability quickly discovered that the encryption used a hard-coded key.
Hard-coded, meaning?
Meaning the same encryption key was embedded directly into the software code. It was the same key for every single installation of that vulnerable version of SimpleHelp.
Oh, that's not good.
Not good at all. Once an attacker figures out that hard-coded key, which usually happens very quickly, once a vulnerability like this is dissected, the encryption provides zero effective protection. They can grab the encrypted file using the path traversal and then just decrypt it using the known hard-coded key.
Renders the encryption completely useless against anyone who knows the key.
Totally useless in that context.
So what were the specific high-value files attackers were targeting with this CVE?
The absolute grand prize was a file located at SimpleHelp configuration serverconfig.xml. This XML file contains pretty much the entire server configuration. And crucially, it holds sensitive authentication and integration secrets.
Like what specifically?
We're talking hashed passwords for the default SimpleHelp admin account and any other locally defined technician accounts. If they integrated with Active Directory or LDAP for authentication, the credentials used for that connection might be in there. OIDC secrets, if they use that, API keys for third-party integrations, even the seeds for time-based one-time password, TOTP, multi-factor authentication, if MFA was set up using SimpleHelp's built-in method.
Wow. Grabbing that one file could essentially give an attacker the keys to the entire SimpleHelp kingdom.
Pretty much. Full administrative access, potentially access to integrated systems, ability to bypass MFA in some cases. Yeah, keys to the kingdom is a good way to put it. Beyond that, serverconfig.xml, attackers might also look for other standard sensitive files depending on the OS. On a Linux server, maybe root.sudo hoping for a root SSH private key, or etc.passwd to get a list of system users. On Windows, maybe try to grab the SAM hive from cwindows system32 config.sam, which contains hashed local administrator passwords, though cracking those usually requires getting the system hive too.
But that serverconfig.xml was the main target.
Definitely the primary, most direct path to full compromise via this vulnerability.
And when did this start getting actively used by attackers?
The first public reports of active exploitation in the wild started surfacing around January 2025. It was seen being used in ransomware campaigns. Cybersecurity agencies picked up on it quickly. CISA, the U.S. Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, added CVE 2024-57727 to its known exploited vulnerabilities catalog, the KEV list, on February 13, 2025.
And getting on the KEV list is significant, right?
It is. It means CISA has confirmed evidence of active exploitation, considers it a significant risk, and requires U.S. federal agencies to patch it within a specific time frame. It serves as a strong signal to the broader community, too.
How was it being used in those initial ransomware attacks? What was its role?
It was primarily used as the initial access vector. Attackers would scan the internet for vulnerable SimpleHelp servers, find one, exploit the path traversal, CVE 2024-57727, to steal serverconfig.xml and maybe other credentials. Use those stolen credentials to log in with full administrative rights. And then from that position of control, they'd use the SimpleHelp server itself as the launch pad to deploy ransomware throughout the network it managed. Specifically, it was linked to double extortion ransomware attacks.
Meaning they steal data before encrypting.
Exactly. They use their initial access, gained via the SimpleHelp vulnerability, to first exfiltrate sensitive data. Then they deploy the ransomware to encrypt systems. This gives them extra leverage pay-up, or we leak your stolen data and you don't get the decryption key.
Nasty. Were particular types of organizations hit first?
The initial public advisories specifically mention incidents where ransomware groups used this exploit to compromise the customers of a utility billing software provider. And that's a really crucial detail, because it vividly demonstrates the supply chain risk. The attackers didn't necessarily target the end utility companies directly. They targeted a supplier, the billing software provider, who presumably used SimpleHelp and hadn't patched it. By compromising the supplier, they gained access into the networks of the supplier's downstream customers, which included utilities. It just hammers home how a vulnerability in one tool, used by one vendor, can cascade and impact many others, including critical infrastructure.
So let's be really clear then. Who is actually at risk from this SimpleHelp flaw? Is it only companies running their own SimpleHelp server?
No, it's definitely broader than that. Obviously, any organization directly operating a SimpleHelp RMM server running version 5.5.7 or earlier is at immediate severe risk. They can be directly targeted and compromised via the path traversal. But as that utility billing example shows, the risk extends significantly to the customers of managed service providers, MSPs, or software as a service, SaaS providers, who use vulnerable SimpleHelp versions to manage those customer environments.
Even if the customer doesn't run SimpleHelp themselves?
Exactly. The MSP is a trusted third party, right? They have legitimate, often privileged access into their clients' networks using tools like SimpleHelp. If the MSP's SimpleHelp server gets compromised because it's unpatched against CVE 2024-57727, the attacker who compromises the MSP potentially gains access to every single one of that MSP's clients through that existing RMM connection.
You, as the customer, might not even know your provider uses SimpleHelp.
Precisely. You might have no idea. But if they do, and they're vulnerable, your network could be compromised indirectly through them. It really highlights the systemic risk from third-party tools, especially for small and mid-sized businesses that heavily rely on outsourcing their IT management and security.
It's a very stark reminder of how interconnected everything is. A single weak link in that digital supply chain.
Can expose many organizations, yeah,
Yeah.
including those providing absolutely essential services like utilities.
Okay. Given this level of risk, both from CVE 2024-57727 specifically, and just the general malicious use of RMM tools, how can organizations figure out if they're affected? How do you detect this stuff?
Detection really has to start with a baseline. You need to understand what's normal in your environment. What does typical network traffic look like? What processes usually run? What files does your authorized RMM tool normally access? Without knowing what's normal, spotting the abnormal, the potentially malicious activity is incredibly difficult.
Security tools like EDR can help here. Endpoint detection and response.
They absolutely can. EDR solutions are designed to monitor endpoint activity, including process execution, file access, network connections. They can certainly help detect the presence and activity of remote access software. But here's the challenge. Simply seeing an RMM agent running isn't automatically bad, right? It's legitimate software. The key is correlation. You need to correlate the RMM activity with other potentially suspicious behaviors.
Like what?
Like, is the RMM agent running at a really weird time, like 3 a.m. on a Sunday? Is it connecting to an IP address in a country you don't do business with? Is it suddenly being used to run PowerShell scripts you didn't authorize? Is it trying to access sensitive directories like credential stores or transferring huge amounts of data outbound? It's combining those weaker signals into a stronger indicator of compromise. That helps reduce the noise, the false positives, and pinpoint genuinely malicious use.
Makes sense. What about detecting the specific SimpleHelp vulnerability, CVE 2024-57727? How would an organization check if they're vulnerable or if they've already been hit?
Okay, step 1 is identification. Are you running a vulnerable version? That's 5.5.7 or earlier. For the SimpleHelp server, you can usually check the version number displayed in the web administration interface, or look in configuration files. Sometimes you might be able to query the server directly appending all versions to the server's URL, sometimes works to reveal version info, though that might depend on configuration.
And for the agent software running on endpoints, the remote access service, or RAS.
On the endpoints, you look for the installation directories. The typical paths are pandy%JWrapper remote access on Windows systems, opt-JWrapper remote access on Linux, and library application support JWrapper remote access on macOS. If you find those directories, the SimpleHelp agent is likely installed.
Are there specific files inside those directories to inspect?
Yes, the configuration files are key. On the server, it's that critical server config.xml we talked about. On the endpoints, look for service-config.xml. This file contains details about which server the agent is configured to connect to. Check the URLs listed inside the connecto tags. Are they your legitimate, expected SimpleHelp server addresses? Also, check the last modified timestamp on that service-config.xml. If it was changed recently and unexpectedly, that could indicate an attacker has reconfigured the agent to point to their own malicious server.
Okay, that tells you if you have it.
Yeah.
How do you find evidence that the path traversal itself was exploited against your server?
For that, you need to dig into logs. Web server logs, application logs from SimpleHelp itself, maybe even system logs on the server. You're looking for suspicious HTTP requests targeting the SimpleHelp interface. Specifically, look for requests containing those directory traversal patterns, sequences in the requested file path. Any evidence of unusual or unauthorized file access attempts originating from the SimpleHelp server process would also be a red flag.
And signs that they got in and did something after exploiting it. Post-exploitation activity.
Right. One very specific indicator mentioned in advisories related to this particular wave of attacks was the appearance of unexpected executable files. These files often had very short, sometimes just 3-letter alphabetical file names like OA.exe, BBB.exe, CCC.exe.
Weird. Why such simple names?
Hard to say for sure. Maybe just laziness, maybe trying to look unassuming, maybe just a quirk of the specific tools they were using. But the key is, check the creation date of any such files found on potentially compromised systems. If they were created after January 2025, when exploitation reportedly began, that's a strong indicator you might have been hit.
That's a very concrete thing to hunt for. Any other post-exploitation signs?
Monitor network traffic. Is your SimpleHelp server suddenly initiating outbound connections to weird IP addresses it never talked to you before? Are your endpoint agents trying to connect to suspicious or unrecognized server URLs? You can check the serviceconfig.xml for those URLs, and also look in the agent's own logs, usually in a log subdirectory within the installation path. For remote access session logs, see where it's been connecting. Look for any unexpected outgoing connections initiated by the SimpleHelp agent process itself on endpoints. It shouldn't typically be making arbitrary outbound connections.
What about within the SimpleHelp application interface, if you can still access it safely?
Yes, check the History tab. Look for any remote sessions logged that you or your team don't recognize. Audit your API tokens if you use them. Are there any new ones you didn't create? Have existing tokens been modified, maybe had IP restrictions removed? SimpleHelp's own logs might contain entries like web download server insecure request. This could indicate probes for the vulnerability or attempts to access things improperly.
So it's really a combination approach. Version checks, looking at files, digging through logs, monitoring network traffic, auditing the application settings.
Exactly. It requires vigilance, knowing your environment, and knowing what anomalies to look for. Detection is definitely multi-layered.
Okay, detection is one thing, but prevention and defense are the real goals. Let's shift there. Beyond just this SimpleHelp issue, what are the general best practices? What should organizations using any kind of remote access software do to harden their defenses?
Yeah, the recommendations really align with standard cybersecurity hygiene and established frameworks. Think NIST cybersecurity framework, CISA's cybersecurity performance goals, CPGs. It's got to be a layered defense in depth strategy, covering architecture, accounts, host controls, network controls. So starting with, let's say, architecture, accounts, and policy, foundational stuff. You need a solid risk management strategy. That includes specifically assessing the risks introduced by tools like RMM, adopt zero trust principles where you can, or at least move towards least privilege configurations. Verify every access attempt. Don't just trust because it's coming from an RMM tool. Ensure users and the tools themselves only have the absolute minimum permissions needed to do their job.
User awareness is key too, right? Given the phishing and credential theft angles.
Absolutely fundamental. Regular user training on phishing risks, social engineering, making sure people understand why they shouldn't click that link or reuse passwords. Phishing exercises can help reinforce this. Consider working with the Security Operations Center, a SOC, for 247 monitoring and expert analysis. They can often spot anomalies faster.
And managing identities, especially admin or RMM accounts.
Crucial. Regularly audit your identity systems, Active Directory, whatever you use. Look for inactive accounts, overly broad permissions, misconfigurations. Clean those up. Implement just-in-time JIT access for privileged operations. Grant elevated rights only when needed for a specific task for a limited duration. And this is non-negotiable. Multi-factor authentication, MFA, everywhere. On all remote access solutions, VPNs, RMM portals, on all administrative accounts, on any account that has privileged access. If your RMM supports it, configure risk-based MFA. Maybe require a step-up authentication for potentially risky actions, like deploying a script to hundreds of machines at once. Speaking of which, have safeguards and an approval process for mass scripting action.
You can't protect what you don't know you have. Inventory matters.
Definitely. Maintain a software bill of materials, an SBOM, for everything, including your RMM tools and any software that might embed RMM capabilities. This helps you react quickly when a vulnerability is announced for a specific component. Also, use external attack surface management, EASM tools. These continuously scan the internet to find your exposed assets, including potentially forgotten or misconfigured remote access interfaces. They give you visibility from an attacker's perspective.
Okay, moving down a layer, host-based controls. What should be done on the actual servers and endpoints?
First, know what's running. Keep an inventory of all authorized remote access software on every device. Audit their configurations regularly. Make sure they're set up securely. Use advanced endpoint security software. EDR is good here, something that can detect malicious behavior even if the RMM tool itself is legitimate, maybe even if it's running entirely in memory, fileless malware techniques. Ensure your logs are capturing enough detail. When an RMM agent runs a command, you need to know what binary ran, what command was executed, what user context, source and destination IPs, exact timestamps. That richness helps distinguish legit use from abuse, especially with attackers using portable executables.
Application control seems relevant too.
Very. Implement application controls or allow listing. Only permit-approved RMM software to run. Even better, if possible, use application control to limit what actions the approved RMM software is allowed to perform on endpoints. Maybe it can monitor but not execute arbitrary scripts, for example.
Yeah.
Apply those zero-trust principles at the application level. And of course, patching. Regular, timely patching is critical. Prioritize internet-facing systems, your RMM servers, VPN gateways, web servers, and the RMM agents themselves. These are prime targets. Patch promptly.
Makes sense. Now, network-based controls. How can the network itself help defend against RMM abuse?
Network segmentation is huge. If an attacker compromises one system via RMM, segmentation can prevent them from easily moving laterally to other parts of the network. Isolate critical systems, different departments, production versus development environments. Contain the blast radius. At your network perimeter, be aggressive about blocking traffic on common RMM ports and protocols, both inbound and outbound, unless there's a documented, approved business need from a trusted source. If you must allow RMM traffic, enforce legitimate use. Maybe consider running it on non-standard ports internally, if that makes sense. And always require access over secure encrypted channels.
Should RMM portals be exposed directly to the internet?
Ideally, no. The best practice is to require authorized RMM tools and consoles to only be accessed from within your trusted network. And that access should come via an approved, secure remote access solution, like a properly configured VPN or maybe virtual desktop infrastructure, ADI, and always protected by MFA. If you absolutely must have an RMM web interface facing the internet, put a web application firewall, WAF, in front of it.
What does a WAF do?
It acts as a reverse proxy, inspecting incoming web requests before they reach the RMM server. It can look for malicious patterns like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and importantly, path traversal sequences like the ones used in the SimpleHelp exploit. It can block those malicious requests, but a word of caution. Test WAFs thoroughly before deploying them in blocking mode. They can sometimes interfere with the normal functioning of the application they're protecting if not configured carefully. Test in a staging environment first.
And the classic advice about RDP, remote desktop protocol.
Still holds true. Avoid exposing RDP directly to the internet, period. It's constantly scanned and attacked. If you need remote desktop access, use it over a secure VPN with MFA. And just generally, disable any unnecessary OS application services or network protocols on your internet-facing systems. Reduce your attack surface. If you don't need it running, turn it off.
Okay, those are solid general recommendations. But the impact and responsibilities aren't the same for everyone. Are there specific actions tailored for, say, the customers who use MSPs versus the MSPs themselves, or even the developers creating these tools?
Yes, absolutely. The perspective and the levers they can pull are different. Let's start with MSPs and SaaS customers. If you're buying these services, first, understand your contract. Really understand it. What security services are included, what isn't included. You need to explicitly address any security requirements that fall outside the standard agreement. Don't make assumptions. The contract should also clearly spell out the incident notification process. How and when will your provider tell you if they have a breach that could impact your environment?
So clarity on responsibilities is key.
Crucial. You also need effective monitoring and logging for your own systems, even if the MSP manages them. If the MSP is doing the monitoring and logging for you, your contract needs to ensure they're doing comprehensive event management. You need visibility into their activities in your environment. How are their admin accounts being used? Are they being audited? Ideally, you should have some way to monitor or audit the MSP's privileged access into your network. And if you detect something suspicious related to the MSP's tools or access, you need a clear channel to report it back to them immediately.
What about protecting logs?
Critical point for customers. Ensure that direct access to your log servers or some, especially the ability to modify or delete logs, is kept completely separate and out of reach of the RMM tool itself. If an attacker compromises the MSP's RMM, you don't want them to be able to erase their tracks in your logs. Customers should also perform their own risk assessments of the third-party software their vendors use, especially critical tools like RMM. Understand the security posture of the tools connecting to your network, and maintain clear communication lines with your vendors about their patching schedules and vulnerability disclosure policies. You need timely information.
Okay, now flipping it. What about the MSPs and IT administrators who are actually using these RMM tools to manage client or internal systems? They hold a lot of power and responsibility.
A huge amount. First, they need to practice what they preach. Secure their own infrastructure rigorously. Harden all their appliances, especially internet-facing ones like VPN concentrators used for remote access. Follow vendor security guidance religiously. MFA, MFA, MFA. Adopt it universally across all customer services they manage on every single account that has any level of access into a customer environment. Treat those MSP technician accounts as extremely privileged because they are.
Should they use full admin rights all the time?
Ideally, no. Configure reduced privilege versions or roles within the RMM tool for common, lower-risk tasks. Maybe a role just for monitoring system health that can't deploy software or change configurations. Use the principle of least privilege even within the RMM. Manage their own internal network risks. Rigorously segregate their internal corporate network from the infrastructure used to manage customers. And critically, segregate individual customer environments from each other. A breach in customer A's network shouldn't easily allow pivoting into customer B's network via the MSP's tools. Even if it's not full zero-trust segmentation, logical separation is vital.
And basic credential hygiene for MSPs.
Absolutely non-negotiable. Do not reuse administrative credentials across multiple customers, ever. Each customer environment needs unique, strong credentials, securely managed, like in a dedicated, audited password vault. Avoid end-of-life EOL software like the plague. No security updates means easy targets. Be transparent with customers. Clearly explain what services are covered, what aren't, and what the plan is for incident response. Conduct regular audits quarterly is a good minimum of all their technology platforms, user accounts, roles. Disable accounts immediately upon employee offboarding or role change. Prune inactive accounts ruthlessly. Use password managers with MFA enforced for all staff. Generate unique, strong passwords. Don't let staff store credentials in browsers. Protect API keys carefully. Use different keys for different integrations. Rotate keys regularly. Store them securely. Enable MFA for API access wherever the platform supports it.
Network access practices for MSPs.
Restrict RDP to the LAN only within client environments and their own. Use a VPN for all administrative tool access, RMM consoles, remote access tools, and always enforce MFA on that VPN connection. Deploy advanced threat protection on their email systems and collaboration platforms to catch phishing attempts targeting their staff. Configure and enforce DMRs for email authentication. Use good antivirus and, ideally, advanced endpoint security like EDR or MDR on all endpoints they manage, including their own. Need that detection and response capability? Patch religiously, both client systems and their own infrastructure, and review their vendors' patching practices too.
Backup protection is crucial against ransomware.
Paramount. Protect local and cloud backups following best practices and vendor guidance. Ensure copies are stored off-site, offline, or in immutable storage, isolated from the production network. Monitor for any signs of backup tampering or deletion. Understand how features like soft delete work in their backup solutions. Move away from shared login accounts for accessing vendor portals or management appliances. Use named user accounts with MFA. Consider adding device trust checks or network IP whitelisting for accessing these critical portals. MSPs really need to reconsider network designs where client networks are treated almost like extensions of the MSP's own network. That creates too much implicit trust. Site-to-site VPNs from vendors providing staff augmentation need extremely tight access controls. Maybe even consider time-of-day restrictions for remote access VPN connections if technicians don't need 24/7 access, and leverage the community. Talk to vendors, participate in peer groups like ISACs, share threat intelligence anonymously if needed. If you experience an attack, learn from others' experiences and best practices. Lastly, consider cybersecurity insurance. Understand the policy details, extortion coverage limits, incident response provider requirements, wartime exclusions, which are becoming more common, prior acts coverage, notification timelines. Run tabletop exercises involving your insurance broker to see how the policy would actually respond in a simulated crisis.
That's a comprehensive list for MSPs. What about the developers building these RMM products in the first place? Do they have a role in preventing misuse?
They absolutely do. Security needs to be built in, not bolted on. They should design their products to include lower privilege operational modes. For example, a dedicated monitoring-only agent or role that simply cannot execute commands or transfer files. This supports least privilege implementations. Developers should also actively monitor how their software is being used and abused in the wild. Are threat actors signing up for free trials to use the tool maliciously? Are they violating terms of service? Take action where possible. The products themselves should provide robust, tamper-evident audit logs, make it hard for attackers or malicious insiders to cover their tracks by deleting logs. Incorporate threat modeling into the software development lifecycle, SDL. Think like an attacker. Where are the potential weak points? How could features be misused? Promote techniques like fuzzing automated testing that throws invalid or unexpected data interfaces, especially for command line interfaces, CLIs, and any open network ports, to find bugs before attackers do. Align development practices with established frameworks like the Secure Software Development Framework, SSDF, from NIST. Integrate advanced monitoring and incident response capabilities into the product, especially for tools managing sensitive ODSS environments. Make threat detection easier for the end user. Promote the adoption and creation of software bills of materials, SBOMs, for their own products. Transparency helps everyone. And fundamentally, embrace security by design and security by default principles. Build security in from the start and ship products with secure configurations enabled by default rather than requiring users to harden them after installation.
It really is a shared responsibility model, isn't it? Developers, providers, customers, everyone has a part to play in securing these powerful tools.
It's the only way it works. It's an ecosystem. A weakness anywhere can affect everyone else. A layered defense across the whole chain is needed.
Okay, let's circle back specifically to that SimpleHelp vulnerability, CVE 2024-57727, the immediate actions. If an organization finds out right now that they're running a vulnerable version, 5.5.7 or earlier, what are the absolute must-do steps?
Priority 1, containment. Immediately isolate the vulnerable SimpleHelp server instance from the internet. This could mean removing its public IP, putting strict firewall rules in place to block all inbound and outbound traffic to it, or just stopping the SimpleHelp service or shutting down the server entirely. Cut off external access immediately. Don't wait.
Step 1, stop the bleeding.
Exactly. Prevent any further exploitation. Step 2, once contained, upgrade. Patch immediately to the latest available SimpleHelp version. As we noted, versions 5.5.8 and later fix this specific path traversal vulnerability and related issues. Patching is the definitive long-term solution.
What if, for some reason, they absolutely cannot patch right away? Any temporary measures?
The advisories do mention potential temporary workarounds, things like disabling unnecessary components of the SimpleHelp server if possible, applying even stricter inbound connection filtering, or significantly ramping up monitoring of logs and traffic related to the server. But, and this is critical, these are explicitly described as temporary and insufficient fixes. They might buy you a tiny bit of time, but they do not fully mitigate the risk. They should only be considered a last resort while you arrange to patch. Patching must happen ASAP.
And if SimpleHelp isn't something they installed directly, but it's embedded in software from another vendor or used by their MSP,
in that case, they need to contact that third-party vendor or MSP immediately. The vendor is responsible for patching the embedded component within their product or service. The vendor should provide guidance and, ideally, should already be proactively notifying all their affected downstream customers about the vulnerability and their patching status.
even after isolating or patching, given that this exploit was active since January 2025, should organizations assume they might have been compromised earlier?
Yes, that is the safest assumption. Assume compromise until proven otherwise. Even if you don't see obvious signs, conduct thorough threat hunting on any systems that were running the vulnerable version or managed by it. Look for evidence of unauthorized file access, especially serverconfig.xml, credential theft, or any persistence mechanisms attackers might have left behind. Run vulnerability scans, host-based and network-based, to confirm the patch is applied correctly and identify any other weaknesses. And specifically, hunt for those indicators of compromise we discussed. The weird three-letter executables created after Jan 2025, unrecognized server URLs in endpoint serviceconfig.xml files, suspicious log entries, anomalous network traffic. Be thorough.
What if the worst has happened and ransomware was deployed, potentially using this vulnerability as the entry point? What's the recovery process?
Okay, if systems are encrypted, first, disconnect. Disconnect the affected systems from the internet and from the rest of your internal network immediately to stop the ransomware potentially spreading further. Then, recovery usually means starting fresh. You'll need to reinstall the operating system from known good, clean installation media, like a trusted USB drive or DVD. Don't try to clean the infected OS, it's generally not reliable. Wipe the system drives completely before reinstalling, and this is absolutely crucial. Only restore data from a clean, trusted backup. That backup needs to come from a protected environment, ideally an offline, air-gapped, or immutable backup store that you are confident was not compromised or infected by the ransomware itself.
Restoring from an infected backup just brings the problem back.
Exactly. You have to restore from a known good point in time before the infection. And regardless of whether ransomware hit or not, if you confirm exploitation or find you are running a vulnerable version, report it. Report the incident or finding to the relevant cybersecurity authorities. In the U.S., that's your local FBI field office, the FBI's Internet Crime Complaint Center, IC3, and CISA. In Israel, report to CERDL. Sharing this information helps them track threat actor activity, understand the scope, and warn others.
What about paying the ransom? Always a tough question.
The official advice from law enforcement and cybersecurity agencies like CISA and the FBI is consistently, do not pay the ransom. There's no guarantee you'll get a working decryption key. There's no guarantee they won't leak your stolen data anyway. And paying encourages the attackers and funds their future operations. However, they also recognize that businesses face difficult decisions. If an organization does choose to pay, they are still strongly urged to report all the details, ransom amount, payment address, attacker communications, to law enforcement to aid investigations.
Okay. Beyond just patching this specific CVE, what other steps should SimpleHelp administrators take to generally improve the security of their server moving forward?
SimpleHelp themselves provided some good additional hardening recommendations post-incident. First, change the administrator password for the server immediately. Better yet, consider disabling the default built-in SimpleHelp admin user altogether. Create a new, dedicated administrator technician account used only for server maintenance, protected with a very strong password and MFA, and potentially restricted to only log in from specific trusted IP addresses. Second, change the passwords for any technician accounts that were configured to use local server credentials for login. Even better, if feasible, disable local technician logins entirely and rely solely on integration with a more robust third-party authentication service, like Active Directory, LDAP, or an SSO provider, which likely has better password policies and MFA options. Third, if you use SimpleHelp's API, generate new API tokens and revoke all the old ones, just in case they were compromised. Fourth, implement strict IP address restrictions wherever possible. Restrict which IPs can log in as technicians or administrators. Restrict which IPs can make API requests. Restrict which IPs the SimpleHelp server itself will accept firewall connections from. Lock it down.
Reduce the attack surface for login attempts.
Exactly. Also, set up server event alerts within SimpleHelp. Configure alerts for critical events like administrator logins, failed login attempts, and any configuration changes. Get notified immediately if something suspicious happens. SimpleHelp also released a configuration analysis tool in version 5.5.9 that can help admins check endpoints to see if their remote access service agents have been maliciously reconfigured to point to an attacker server. Use that tool. And finally, stay informed. Join the SimpleHelp mailing list or monitor their security announcements page to get timely notifications about future vulnerabilities and patches.
You mentioned earlier that sometimes patching isn't perfectly smooth. Users reported some glitches after upgrading to 5.5.8.
Yes, that sometimes happens in the real world. Some users reported issues like intermittent connection problems after the upgrade, or weird display scaling issues with the technician console on high-resolution monitors. It's a reminder that patching, while essential, can sometimes have side effects. In this case, the user community seemed to quickly find and share workarounds, things like changing the default connection method setting in the technician console, or adjusting Windows High DPI compatibility settings for the launcher executable. It just highlights the practical challenges IT teams face, balancing the critical need for security patching with maintaining operational stability.
This whole deep dive into the SimpleHelp vulnerability, it really serves as a potent, specific example.
Yeah.
But it definitely fits into a much larger and frankly more worrying picture, doesn't it? Especially regarding threats against critical infrastructure sectors like energy and utilities.
That's absolutely right. The SimpleHelp incident hitting a utility billing provider's customers is almost a textbook illustration of the kinds of vulnerabilities, and particularly the supply chain risks that critical infrastructure is grappling with right now. The overall threat landscape they face looking into 2025 is just incredibly volatile. We're seeing attacks that are not just happening more often, but they're significantly more sophisticated, more coordinated, and causing more damage than ever before.
And the scary part is, it feels like the attackers are often moving faster, evolving their tactics quicker than many defenders in these critical sectors can keep up.
The data seems to bear that out. Some reports indicated cyber attacks against U.S. utility companies jumped nearly 70% between 2023 and 2024, and the cost of breaches keeps rising. The global average cost hit $4.88 million in 2024, according to IBM Ponon, up 10% year over year. The financial impact is huge, but for critical infrastructure, the potential consequences go way beyond money, impacting public safety, economic stability, even national security.
And new vulnerabilities are emerging because of how these systems are changing, right? The IT-OT convergence.
Exactly. That convergence of traditional information technology, IT, think emails, business servers, and operational technology, OT. The systems controlling physical processes like SCADA systems, pipeline controls, power grid equipment, creates new security gaps. You have legacy OT hardware, maybe decades old, that was never designed with internet security in mind, now being connected to modern IT networks and software for remote monitoring or efficiency gains. Systems that everyone thought were safely air-gapped, physically isolated, are increasingly being connected directly or indirectly to external networks. This dramatically expands the potential attack surface.
And those communication issues between teams you mentioned earlier, how do they play into this?
They become a critical vulnerability during an incident. Attackers actively exploit the fact that in many critical infrastructure organizations, the IT teams, the OT engineering teams, and the cybersecurity teams still operate in silos. They might rely on slow, insecure methods like email chains, phone calls, or unencrypted chat tools to coordinate during a crisis. This causes delays, confusion, misinformation, exactly what an attacker wants. Every minute of confusion is another minute they have to further their attack, whether it's deploying ransomware, disrupting operations, or stealing sensitive operational data.
If you had to name the top, say, 3 threats facing the energy and utility sector specifically right now in 2025, what would they be?
Okay, top 3. First, definitely ransomware and nation-state attacks. These aren't just about stealing data for money anymore, although that still happens. We're seeing sophisticated ransomware gangs and state-sponsored actors specifically targeting industrial control systems, ICS, SCADA environments, and the critical supply network supporting energy infrastructure. Their motives can be financial, but often they're also geopolitical disruption, demonstrating power, gaining leverage. The Colonial Pipeline incident in 2021 is the poster child for the real-world impact massive fuel shortages, panic buying, a reported $5 million ransom paid. We're seeing evidence of increased attempts to gain access to grid management systems, potentially to manipulate energy distribution. That's a terrifying scenario.
Okay, number 2.
Second major threat, supply chain vulnerabilities. And this ties directly back to our RMM discussion. Energy and utility networks are incredibly complex ecosystems. They rely on hundreds, maybe thousands of third-party vendors, suppliers, software providers, service providers like MSPs. Each one of those third parties is a potential entry point into the utilities network. The projected costs of software supply chain attacks are staggering, expected to jump from around $60 billion in 2025 to $138 billion by 2031. And Gartner predicted that nearly half, 45% of organizations worldwide would experience a software supply chain attack in 2025. That's triple the rate from just a few years ago. Insecure remote access practices by vendors, like using unpatched RMM tools or weak authentication, are a huge risk here.
And the third biggest threat?
Third would be insider threats and misconfigurations. Not all threats come from the outside. In these large, complex, geographically distributed utility environments, simple mistakes can have catastrophic consequences. Accidental misconfigurations by well-meaning employees or contractors, maybe setting up a firewall rule incorrectly, using shared credentials on a critical system, can inadvertently open doors for attackers or cause outages directly. And then there's the risk of malicious insiders. Though statistically less common, it can be devastating. The lack of secure, unified, and auditable platforms for IT, OT, and security teams to collaborate and quickly spot or address these internal risks, whether accidental or intentional, makes them harder to catch before they cause damage.
So facing this really challenging threat landscape, sophisticated external attackers, supply chain risks, internal issues, what can organizations, especially critical infrastructure, do to build real resilience? It sounds like it goes way beyond just buying more security tech.
It absolutely does. The technology is necessary, but it's not sufficient. The real challenge during a major cyber incident often isn't, do we have a firewall? It's, can our teams respond quickly, effectively, and cohesively under immense pressure? This means organizations need to consciously shift, move away from relying on fragmented, slow, reactive communication methods during a crisis. They need to build capabilities for real-time, structured coordination.
What does that look like in practice when, the proverbial stuff hits the fan?
It means enabling your different teams, cybersecurity, IT operations, OT or engineering teams, maybe physical security, legal, communications, who often work in different worlds, using different tools, maybe in different locations, to come together and collaborate securely and efficiently the moment an incident is detected. Trying to manage a fast-moving cyber attack on critical systems using email chains, conference calls that people can't join, or consumer-grade chat apps, it just doesn't work. It guarantees delays, misunderstandings, poor coordination, wasted time. That's why there's a growing need for secure collaboration platforms specifically designed for mission-critical operations, including incident response.
How do those platforms help?
They provide secure, persistent communication channels tailored for incident response. Think dedicated virtual war rooms. This allows teams to escalate issues properly, track who's doing what, share critical technical data or logs securely in real time, and make decisions much faster and with more confidence than trying to piece together information from scattered emails and chats.
So they help urban order to the chaos.
Exactly. The good ones offer structured workflows for crisis management. You can predefine incident response plans, set up channels automatically based on the type of incident, assign roles and tasks with clear accountability, control access to sensitive information based on role, and securely share files or screen captures needed for troubleshooting. This structure is invaluable for maintaining clarity and control during the high-stress, chaotic initial phases of an incident. It dramatically accelerates the whole response and recovery process, mean time to detect, MTTD, mean time to respond, MTTR.
So you're saying true cyber resilience, it's not just about the tech defenses, but fundamentally about the people, the teams, and their ability to work together effectively under fire.
I believe that's absolutely fundamental, yes. Resilience doesn't start or end with the firewall or the EDR agent. It relies heavily on the people managing those systems and their capacity to collaborate seamlessly when everything is going wrong. These teams don't just need more flashing red alerts on a dashboard. They need actionable workflows, clear procedures, and secure, reliable communication channels that empower them to work together to communicate, coordinate, and respond quickly and decisively to protect the critical systems and the essential services we all rely on. Think back to that massive Rogers communications outage in Canada a few years back. It wasn't primarily a security breach, but it crippled communications across the country. It highlighted how traditional communication methods can fail spectacularly during a large-scale infrastructure crisis. When critical systems go down, effective communication is everything.
This has been a really comprehensive journey. We've gone from the convenience of remote access tools to how they're being actively weaponized, used SimpleHelp vulnerability as a very real case study, and then broadened out to the significant threats facing critical infrastructure.
Yeah, it really underscores the need for constant vigilance. Understanding the tools you use, their risks, keeping them patched, implementing strong security controls, paying attention to the supply chain, and critically, being prepared before an incident hits. Having plans, practicing them, and ensuring your teams can communicate and coordinate effectively when it matters most.
It's definitely a complex challenge, no easy answers, but understanding these nuances, how legitimate tools become attack vectors, is surely the first step towards building stronger, more resilient defenses.
Couldn't agree more. Awareness is the starting point.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, here's a final thought for you, our listener, to mull over. Given this interconnectedness of our digital world, the increasing sophistication of threats we've discussed, how prepared, truly prepared, are your critical systems? And maybe even more importantly, how prepared are the teams, the people responsible for managing them, to communicate and coordinate effectively when, not if, a major incident strikes? That brings us to the end of this deep dive. Before we sign off, one last thank you to our sponsor, Stonefly. As a leader in enterprise storage, backup and disaster recovery, AI storage, and cloud solutions, Stonefly really focuses on delivering that secure, ransomware-proof storage, including those critical technologies like air-gapped and immutable storage that can make all the difference.
Essential layers in any robust data protection strategy today.
Absolutely. So if you're looking to bolster your defenses against the kinds of threats we've talked about today, check them out. You can contact Stonefly at sales@stonefly.com to schedule a demo. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.